To speak with great pleasure to the Regulatory Improvement Bill in support of this bill. And as a number of my colleagues have said before me, this is a common sense bill and it will make it easier to do business. Labor is supporting this bill, and as it's been mentioned, it's an omnibus bill, makes amendments to 9 pieces of legislation in order to improve the regulatory framework and reduce the compliance business on business. And it is an important bill, and it's important also, I think, that that I correct what was said by the previous speaker about the fact that it wouldn't have come before the House if the government hadn't brought it, and that is that it was actually submitted to the House before the last election, and it's very unclear, given the importance of this bill, given the sensible nature of it, and given all the previous work that's gone into it, as to why it's being rushed through under urgency. And I think it's important that we note that there is no reason for it to be considered under urgency, and it has had an enormous amount of work gone into it, which is largely due to the important work done by my colleague, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, who has had a number of mentions in the House today, and I think that she deserves a lot of credit for that, and that there's a lot of justification for that. And because Labor supports this bill, not because it's been rushed into urgency by the government, but because it's the result of a very careful 15 months quality regulation review, and it reflects a lot of consultation, as you've heard, between government agencies and 200 businesses. The previous Labor government knew a lot about consultation and knew a lot about how to do it properly. This government doesn't appear to know a lot about consultation and seems to think that rushing bills through under urgency reflects consultation with the New Zealand people. And this bill is more important than its content, and the previous Labor government listened very carefully to businesses and set about implementing their recommendations, whereas the style of the Minister in charge of this bill, Rodney Hyde, is to ignore recommendations and come up with his own plan, which doesn't bode well for New Zealand business, because they'll get what Mr Rodney Hyde says they need. The important point to make about this bill is that the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, when she was Commerce Minister, how many is that? Consulted widely on the quality regulation review which led to this bill, and it appears that Mr Rodney Hyde, the so-called Regulatory Reform Minister, will not place as much emphasis on consultation, does not place as much emphasis on consultation, and of course the key example of that is the Super City, where there's been a reasonably sham process disguised as consultation that has been undergone in consulting with Aucklanders. But Mr Speaker, the way that this bill has been introduced to the House does not reflect the work that's gone into it. That's one important point to make. But the way that it has been introduced to the House certainly reflects the way that the National Act government and their approach to lawmaking, and that is no consultation. This bill makes some small, they're uncontroversial, but they're very important changes to the regulatory environment. And that quality regulation review that was led by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell also led to a greatly enhanced regulatory impact statement regime, which is another thing that the previous Labor government should be very proud of, and is largely due to the work of the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, my colleague, who is the chair of the Commerce Committee. And I'd like to make a few comments about the Commerce Committee, because I think that that generally the Commerce Committee, which is led by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, is a very effective committee that we all work together generally very cooperatively and harmoniously in the main, and that is largely due to the extremely experienced chairing skills of the Honourable Leanne Dalzell. And I think that my colleagues across the House, all of my colleagues across the House who sit on the Commerce Select Committee, even the ones that have come and subbed on this Commerce Committee, make the comment about how well it is chaired by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, and what a pleasure it is to sit on it. So, turning back to the bill, this is, as I've made the point, this is a bill that Labor introduced, and the credit is being taken by the Minister Rodney Hyde. But it is an important point to make that annual regulatory improvement bills are a sensible way of ensuring that quality regulation takes place, unlike the ACT Party's regulatory responsibility bill, which is still languishing on the order paper. So I'm going to make a couple of comments about the process that led up to this bill, which was introduced by the Honourable Leanne Dalzell in response to the Quality Regulation Review. And that review found that when businesses dealt with government, that they don't see discrete agencies. And I'm sure that you may have, and that is a really important point, because it goes to the way that citizens view government and view the services that government provides, citizens and businesses, that they don't want to see a whole lot of individual organisations that they need to deal with separately. They would like to see and do see a single entity, the government, and because of the requirement to deal with all the single entities, businesses particularly become frustrated at having to provide the same information over and over again to different agencies. And so Labor looked at the regulatory framework under the leadership of the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, and new regulations were made from a business perspective. And as well as introducing this bill, the regulatory impact analysis regime was strengthened to ensure that future regulation properly identified the problems to be solved and looked at all of the potential options for resolving it. And I think and they have taken the RISs out of the bills, and I have to say that it's actually quite difficult to access them, to get access to the regulatory impact statement for this bill. My office had to go through quite a rigmarole this morning. And I know that my colleague, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, has talked about this on a number of occasions when she speaks to the House, because the access and the public access to the regulatory impact statement is extremely important. I'd just like to quickly touch on another thing that the Labor government launched as a part of this quality regulation review, which was led by my colleague, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, which was a 2-year trial of a business cost calculator, which was in order to quantify the compliance costs of regulation. And I thought I might just tell the House a little bit about the business compliance cost calculator, which is a software tool that allows government officials to calculate the true costs for businesses of any regulations that they're recommending to government. And the tool's designed to assist policymakers create a higher quality regulation in a uniform and efficient manner. And a similar type of tool is being used successfully in Australia and some European countries, and the Australian model is currently being adapted for use in the New Zealand environment. And it's envisaged that in the long term, the use of this tool will support greater productivity and competitiveness by allowing more resources to be applied to core business activities. And the point I'm making here is that this is just one of the measures that was introduced through the Quality Regulation Review led by my colleague, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, who had an absolute commitment to making it easier for businesses to do their business in New Zealand and to put sensible measures in place. And this bill is the result of that work. And
I regret to advise the member that her time has